Hi guys, today we're going to talk about worm composting. And before you go like, ooh, give it a chance, see what I have to say. Did you know that the average person produces about 4.3 pounds of waste every day, and the majority of that, 55%, goes to the landfill? And the second highest component in that is food waste. Now, according to the United Nations, if you believe their figures, Americans waste about 30 to 40% of their food. That is not the case in this house, as you can well see. But that comes out to about 20 pounds per month per person. That's a lot of wasted material. But the other thing that you have to consider, when you throw away food waste, you are throwing away nutrients that can be recycled for your plants in your garden, your house plants, or whatever else you want to do. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, this is some food waste that I've collected just over the weekend, and it feels like it's about 5 to 7 pounds. But the thing about this food waste is, I don't eat banana peels, I don't eat the rind of melons, so the majority of this material in here is stuff that we wouldn't have consumed anyway. Now, most people would just throw this out, and if you have a garbage disposal, they probably chew it up and send it down the drain. But if you live in the country, that is not something you want to do, because septic systems are not designed to take on this kind of organic matter. So if you're doing that, your septic system is not going to last very long. The rest of it goes into our liquid waste system, like everything else. And why send it away from your property when you can recover those nutrients and use them? Now, this is some finished compost here. In other words, worm poop. And it's also part of the bedding, which we'll talk about in a minute. And this material can be used in potting mixes, or for instance, in California, I read about some research a few years ago where they would use worm compost in the planting hole of grapevines, and they found they had a higher percentage of survival, and the plants were much more vigorous. And I'll show you some plants where I've used worm compost around them when they planted. We'll see how that works out. Now, I mentioned bedding. Worm compost, they have to have bedding, like they have soil outside. And what I like to use is shredded newspaper. This is shredded newspaper. And I sit down and binge watch on Netflix, and I simply tear the material when I need it. And newspaper has a grain, so you tear it along the grain in this direction, and it goes straight down like that. If you tear it across, it doesn't always tear straight. And what I do is I just sit down and I just keep tearing this paper smaller and smaller and smaller until I get the size that I want. And this is what the worms will live in as you add food to the worm composting bin. Now, some people might be concerned about the inks in newspaper, but the majority of the newspaper now has soy inks, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. The other thing I will use is shredded office paper, and people will just give you this stuff. You can even go to recycling centers and get it if you want, but I got some of this from an office where I used to work. But when they make white paper like this, they use a lot of chemicals and a lot of bleach. So what you need to do is soak this first. So what I normally do is I'll put this in some water, soak it for about 5 to 10 minutes, pour the water off, and then I will put more water in it, let it sit for 5 minutes, pour the water off, and then when the water has drained out of your bedding, whether you're using newspaper or whether you're using office paper, it'll be safe for the worms. Now, something like this, what I like to do when I'm going to feed the worms is I will put the bedding on one side of the box, especially if I have compost that's ready to use, like I have in my boxes right now. I'll push the compost that I'm going to take out to one side of the box. I'll put new wet bedding in there, and then as I put the bedding in, I will layer this material. And then the worms, the majority of them will start to move over to the fresh area, because when the worm compost gets too concentrated with their waste, it's not good for them any more than it would be any animal living in their waste. So they will migrate over to the new material, and then I can get the remaining worms out using a light, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Now, the kind of worm that we use in the worm composting bin is called a red wiggler or red worms. They go by a number of different names, But those are the best composting worms because they will reproduce easily in the bed, as opposed to, say, Canadian night crawlers or some of the other species of worms. And another thing, they're easy to get your hands on. You can buy them through gardening catalogs, but many times if you have friends that are doing worm composting, their populations will get so high in the box that they'll just give you a few handfuls. If you buy them, they usually will come by the pound, and you usually have about 1,000 worms per pound. And to get a full box going in a hurry, you should buy 1 to 2 pounds of worms and you'll be in business pretty quickly. I didn't do that. I just got some worms from a friend, not even a pound, and I just fed them lightly and they just reproduced. And it just took a little bit longer for me to get my box established. Now, my boxes are plastic boxes that I picked up at Lowe's or Home Depot. Now, normally what we would suggest you do is put some kind of vent holes in those, because otherwise your compost will be very wet, especially if you're adding too much food. So what I like to do, I like the plastic ones because I had made a wooden box, which was what we call the 1, 2, 3 box, which means that it's 3 feet wide, 2 feet long, and 1 foot high. I should say 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, 1 foot high. And that box, I found many different things got into it if it wasn't completely sealed. I had millipedes in there, centipedes, and centipedes will eat your worms. I also had sow bugs in there, and they're little shredders. They don't really harm anything, but I'd rather not have them in the box. So if you're going to have a plastic box, you should have some vents, and the vents should be covered with very fine screen so that other creatures that you don't want in your box can't get in there. And because this is so wet, and it's been sitting out for about 2 weeks and it's still quite wet, you will find that the wooden box will dry a little faster. And I used to actually have to add some moisture to it. The question a person might have is, how much food waste can I actually add to my container? Well, that depends on the size of the container. So if you had a 1, 2, 3 box, you could add about 2 pounds of material per week. If you overwhelm it, then it's going to smell, essentially. And the types of thing you want to put in it is fresh vegetable material. You do not want to add things like oils or meats or any of those types of things, because they can smell really bad. And that project will be over pretty quickly if your wife or husband starts to smell stuff coming out of your basement. So anyway, what I normally would suggest you do is dig a small hole in your bedding, bury some of the food and cover it, and then just remember where you put it, and then the next time you add something, move over a little bit and dig a hole, put it in there. And the worms will follow the food. Now, my plastic container, because it holds so much moisture, I only feed my worms maybe once a month, and they do quite well, because if I put too much of this material in there too fast, there's going to be an awful lot of water down on the bottom, and that's going to kill them. In our next video, we'll talk about separating the worms from the compost and using the compost. So I hope to see you a little bit later. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please subscribe. This is Gary. See you later.